And we're super excited tonight to begin a new panel event series called CoinList Building Blocks. I spend most of my time talking to issuers and primarily focused on the token sales side, but we recognize that there's a lot of other challenges that teams are facing, and we wanted to begin a series to focus on those challenges. In many conversations with teams, the number one issue that they talked about was the challenge of bringing new hires onto the company, so recruiting, compensation, interviewing. So we wanted to begin a series with that, and really if you're going to start any crypto company or any company for that matter, hiring is going to be top of the list of things that are important to you. Obviously, we've got beer and wine in the back, so please feel free to indulge yourselves. Yes, and if there's pizza as well, so if you want the classic crypto meetup, you have to have pizza. All right, so quick show of hands. As far as in the room, how many of you actually focus on hiring yourselves? Are you involved in the process? Do you do recruiting, interviewing? Is this something you do? All right. And then anyone in the room that's actually looking for a job in crypto? All right. There you go. Match made. It's happening. All right. So I just wanted to get a sense for where the room's at. Really, the audience for this conversation is meant to be other people in the space to learn about, where are you finding talent? Are you paying with tokens? Are you compensating with tokens versus equity? What interview strategies are you using? So we'll be talking about all those topics today, but I'm going to stop talking now and let the panelists kick things off by introducing themselves, their project, a little bit of background, and then we'll go from there.
Hi, I'm Matt Robb, the CEO of Dispatch Labs, and another company called Bureau. Dispatch Labs is a native blockchain protocol that's going live on Monday. Can't wait for that piece to be out. We're a native protocol that deals with data analytics, and the Bureau is our sales arm. So we have an accelerator in the mission and enterprise advisory.
I'm Zach. I lead recruiting at 0x. We're building a project, a protocol for the decentralized exchange of any tokenized assets currently on Ethereum. Before 0x, I led recruiting at a YC startup called Keep, a little analytics company. Before that, I was at Dropbox. Prior to that, I was at Google, so I've been doing the hiring thing for a little bit. Excited to chat with you guys.
Hey guys, I'm Josh. I'm at DYDX, which is a protocol for decentralized derivatives and margin trading. So we've been live for about a couple months now. Our main product is a tokenized short or leverage position on Ethereum-based tokens. So these are traded on like Radar Relay, on Expo, which is a product that we built. So check it out. Before DYDX, I joined about 7 or 8 months ago. I worked at a startup called Nimble Pharmacy, doing strategy and operations, and I was at a banking company before that.
Hey, my name is Brian Sachs. I'm a co-founder of a company called Beam. We build crypto payments infrastructure that interfaces primarily with Ethereum. At this point in time, we've been around for about 15 months. Team is small, still at 10, all engineers. So that's kind of the angle. Hiring that early engineering core is kind of the angle that I bring tonight. That's what we're working on.
So the microphone is going to operate like a conch and eyes. So if you hold it, you can speak. We'll kick things off with really, at the beginning of the process. What are some of the most fruitful sources for you guys to find talent? It's obviously very specialized in the space, a lot of technical talent required. So where are you guys going to find talent, and is it different than where you might have gone if you were operating in, say, Google or Dropbox or a previous startup role?
Beyond the network, which I think is pretty obvious, those of us who are plugged into the space, we do. So one interesting observation, I think this is not really insightful. Most people realize this. There are a ton of people that want to get into the space, right? Far more people than most of us, either by hiring a lead recruiter or as co-founders can source and can really sift through. So we do engage a recruiter. And the way we want to, it's the recruiter has sort of turned into our ace in the hole. So much so that I'm going to keep the name of the recruiter private for the purpose of this discussion. So, what we did is we kind of leveraged our advisors early on, prior company experience to know who was really killer, and spent a lot of time with 2 different firms. They're not in the blockchain space, they have not interfaced with it. Spent a lot of personal time with them, and we got them really excited about what we're doing. And brought them to a very deep level of understanding of the profile of candidate that we were looking for, obviously being incredibly selective. And they've just crushed it for us. So beyond sort of the kind of organic necessity of activating your networks, I think really locating a high leverage recruiter has accelerated our hiring roadmap substantially and really delivered talent that frankly would have been outside our network, and that we would probably not have reached otherwise. A lot of that talent, depending on what you're working on, we're looking for pretty deep network security protocol layer people. A lot of that talent is kind of in the South Bay at a core of 5 or 6 firms that are really the only 5 or 6 companies that some of these specialized people could feasibly work for. And this is a new field of opportunity for them. And having inroads into that network, I think, through a recruiter has been essential for us.
Yeah, we've been using also a couple of very, specialized blockchain recruiting firms. I think the key there is, I think you bring up a really good point about just investing in them, getting them excited, because I think ultimately they're going to be trying to, their interest is to basically try and fill a position and make some money, right? So if you get them really excited and buy into that, then they're going to do that with the candidate as well. The other thing we've been doing, because most of our engineering positions haven't been overly specialized, we're actually kind of pretty agnostic in terms of the person's background, as long as they're just really smart and sharp people. So we've been actually using just the traditional channels as well, like Panelists, Hire.com, all that stuff. And then the third one, which we got pretty lucky with actually, was we reached out to a few candidates on the Proof of Work newsletter. They have a common application, and we ended up hiring someone out of that, which is pretty random. But stuff like that, I think you can actually get pretty creative with crypto, and it does work kind of well.
Thanks. Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of this depends on what your hiring philosophy is. At 0x, for the most part, with the exception of a couple of niche roles, we also follow this kind of agnosticism, I guess. We don't really care too much about someone's experience with our stack or any specific stack. We care far more that someone is intelligent and, from an engineering perspective, if it's an engineering role, can write good code in whatever language they prefer. Hopefully they communicate well and are friendly human, and ideally they learn pretty quickly. We also are pretty intentional and public about the fact that we'll hire folks who may not have necessarily built around blockchain in the past. You don't need prior industry experience. We do care that there's some interest and some genuine curiosity, but it's okay if you haven't come from a blockchain background. So I think that affects what our sources are, but I guess to get to that, we've actually had a decent amount of success with inbound candidates, which has been really cool. People who've applied on our jobs page or through AngelList. This is anecdotal, I haven't looked at the data, but I would say probably a third or more of our team applied directly, which has been really exciting. We've also taken advantage of referrals, also anecdotal, but I would guess about a third might have come from referrals. There are benefits and detriments to referrals in my mind. I think they know somebody at the company, so they might be excited to work with them, and they might have some context coming in the conversation that's helpful. But I think detrimentally, referrals can sometimes lead to homogenous groups of talent, in my opinion. People tend to associate with other people who are like themselves, so we have to be mindful of that as well. We kind of counteract this a little bit with a couple of hiring platforms that have been great at providing people that come from lots of really diverse backgrounds. 2 in particular that I really like. One is called Interviewing.io, which is a really cool service where you can interview engineers on a blind basis. So first interaction with them, you've never seen their resume, and you're kind of just basing it on their skills. There's another place in New York called Recurse Center, which I really like, which is kind of analogous to a writer's retreat for programmers. They spend 12 weeks there and there's no curriculum. They kind of just work on cool stuff with like-minded people. Beyond that, we've done a fair amount of sourcing, and maybe to address your question about like what's different about crypto versus a regular non-crypto startup. I think the fact that it's,
We get it.
you guys hear me?
Yeah.
I'll try and talk a little louder. I think the fact that this industry is pretty heavily open source is actually really helpful from a sourcing perspective, and not even just in terms of engineering, but there are a lot of places that you can go and look for folks and more meaningfully engage them, given that so much is public than maybe in like a more traditional context, like digging into other open source projects, maybe looking at the ETH research forums, looking at who's received grants from certain foundations, even mining your community, which I think is something that's unique to a lot of crypto projects. Like you have a massive Twitter following, who's liking your posts, who's active on your subreddits, and you can much more meaningfully engage them and say, hey, I saw this commit that you made on this project, it's super relevant to what we're doing. So sourcing has been fruitful, and lastly, I think events like the ETH Global Hackathons have been great. We've met a bunch of people who are just builders that we've been able to talk to. So in some, that's kind of the most productive sources, I would say.
I agree with everything that everybody said. The only other thing that I would say is hire people with their own networks, right? You hire people who are going to hire people. And we've been fortunate enough, our CPO ran the SM developers. We have a fruitful source of developers, obviously. And I've grown and sold businesses, I've got the gray hair room, so I've grown and sold businesses for a long time. So I've hired probably 500, 600 people. I can hire for the easy roles that are not crypto specific, like that. And then there's particular specialized roles that are a little bit harder to fill.
So one of my questions, although I think you're keeping the secret, Ryan, is if you do have any companies you're willing to share, maybe it's not a recruiter specifically, but job board, you mentioned AngelList a few times, I think everyone knows that, but anything that you're willing to give your colleagues in the industry an inside track on, it's okay if you don't, but just put it out there. Okay.
I already said this, I'm a big fan of interviewing IO. They also have a great blog, so if you're curious about recruiting, arguably the best recruiting blog I know of, I would say it's worth checking out. Again, Reader Center and then open sources, and my writer blog for this stuff.
So we are in the land of big tech in the Bay Area, and I'm curious, for those of you maybe did it more recently or over the past year or two, what type of applicant inflow you're seeing from larger tech companies, so whether it's Google or FinTech, Facebook, is that where your applicants are coming from, or are they coming from other sources, other talent pools?
Yes, but also, if I get another marketing intern that wants to be hired, just wants to go up. I think there's, like you said, everybody wants to get in, but not a lot of people aren't quality candidates, period, whether it's crypto or
Yeah, I think for us, it's actually remained pretty consistent despite the market trends recently. We do see applicants from very big companies and also a team from Facebook and Google and Dropbox and Square and Quora, but it's not a majority of candidates who apply. I would say that interestingly, even given the market downturn, it's remained pretty consistent with the level of interest from those folks.
I think the big change for us was when we changed from like a seed to a Series A company. Like, I think as a seed tech company, there was a lot of people who were in like large tech companies who were a little bit more risk averse and probably like less inclined to like make that massive jump. So we've seen like quite a big difference in the types of candidates who've been more willing to at least like, come for an interview since we raised the Series A. But generally, like I think it's like pretty even split between large tech companies versus just like startup experience.
And feedback off what you mentioned earlier is, given the recent market downturn, any changes in either demands or expectations from the applicants that are coming to you or people that you're reaching out to?
expectations have changed, for sure. Not much, like demand is still there.
I am still staying busy. I think the volume is still there for what it's worth. If anything, I found this downturn to be interesting in that the level of investment, and I don't even mean financially, like emotional and philosophical investment from people that have applied might be a little bit different. The people who we're talking to now versus maybe the people who I talked to when the market was a little bit higher. I joined in March of this year. I think are still eager to work in this space despite what the price of any given asset might be. So I don't necessarily think the downturn is a bad thing. I've actually we've talked to some really interesting folks who are clearly thinking long term about this stuff.
So switching gears from the actual recruiting side and more onto the interviewing, wondering about the screening process, any red flags that you look out for or things you want to see in a candidate when they're coming to you. And then in terms of interviewing, what process do you use to onboard candidates, whether it's on the technical or non-technical side?
The ability to roll with budgets, for sure. I mean, more so than any other tech kind of industry that I've heard of, tech era that I've been in, just changes daily. So people who are looking for something steady state, that's not the so interviewing that out very early is the only thing I focus on really.
For us, I think we obviously want to hire people who are technically strong, but and not even just in an engineering context, but technically good at whatever their role is. But I think we equally emphasize what we consider to be our core values. And anytime you're growing quickly, this is naturally going to have an impact on your culture. So we're very intentional about trying to find folks who we can really align with these three core values that we have that we want to maintain no matter how big this company grows. And I think that has some effect on how we do our interviews. I'm actually in the middle of writing a blog post on our interview format right now. I'm going to be the intentionality behind it, what we've learned, and I hope to ship that in the next couple of weeks, definitely before the end of the year. So if you want to keep an eye out, but I can give you a high level idea.
Yep.
One thing that I really like, I'm a pretty strong believer in trying to interview folks by having them do stuff that's actually emulative of the real work that they'll be doing when they're at your company. So we've tried to design our interviews to be very practical and give people exposure to 0x and to the work. And the general format for us is we start with a phone interview, regardless of the role, that's pretty much focused on fundamentals. Like, do you have the very, very basic core competencies for this job? But the majority of the signal that we get from our interviews actually comes from a pretty small project that we usually ask people to work on. And in many cases, we'll pay them for if we expect that it's going to command a significant amount of time. That's directly related to what they'll be doing. So if they're an engineer, they might have to build a small thing that forces them to redo our documentation and look at some of our code on GitHub and interact with our contracts and actually build a thing on 0x. If they're a data scientist, we might give them access to real historical data and say, like, here's a pretty simple question we have, dig through this and come up with some answers. If they're in recruiting, I might present them with, like, hey, we imagine we might want to hire more folks who at the protocol layer can think deeply about cross-chain interoperability, like find me a couple candidates who might be worth reaching out to. So I want them to do something practical that is not arbitrary. And then the on-site interview is mostly reflection on that, kind of more around culture and values and getting to know one another. So we'll dig deep into the thing that they did on their own time. But the point being, like, I don't think there are very many cases where if you work at 0x, you're going to be standing in front of a whiteboard for an hour, like reversing a red and black binary tree or whatever it is. So I think it's in my personal opinion, like higher signal to test for. It's a higher predictor of success to test for the stuff that they're actually going to be doing. If that makes sense.
Yeah, totally agree with all that. Similar principles for us, except the process is a little different. So we do like a technical screen up front, just for engineering. We do some like a couple of pretty standard on-sites. It's not like super rigorous, and then if we like them and kind of like they pass the technical standard, we actually just invite them to do one week work trial in our office and like give them like a pretty big piece of work. Actually just like experience what it's like to sit with our teams. We're only 6 people. Often that's like even more important than the actual kind of like work itself. It's just like, can they actually be in this environment and feel comfortable, do the work and feel really happy about it. So as an example, we got one of our engineers to actually just write like an integration with like another decentralized exchange. So like, for example, DYDX plugs into 0x liquidity opponent. So we got someone to just explore what that would look like if we just like integrated in a Kyber or like SWAP or like one of these other indexes. So So it's like something real, high responsibility, just to get a good signal whether at from a problem solving point of view as well as like passion for the work it is.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yep.
How do you run into a situation where it's difficult for somebody to do a work trial?
Definitely. Yeah, sure. It's like the trade-off, right? I think not everyone can like take the entire week. So we've been certainly flexible about like maybe it's like 3 days, or whether maybe it's like some afternoons and evenings, whatever it is, we try and make it work.
Yeah, that's a signal too.
It is a
They're willing to
signal.
say, okay, we take on a weekend to do this. That means they really want the job.
Yeah.
That means they're really into it.
Everyone in the company's done a work trial, so that's a really great signal for us. And then we also pay them as well, so not after free labor. But yeah, it's definitely like something to think about, right? Like, I don't think it's super scalable, like as the company grows. But I think it's really important, especially in the early days, to make a really big effort up front.
Yeah, I think if you can make it happen, it's valuable. I'm pretty sure Coinbase might have done something similar when they were very early.
Yeah.
So yeah, so we're good.
We kind of have similar iteration of several other steps. We've tried to be incredibly efficient with the way we do this. I said earlier, we have a recruiting partner that's done really well for us. We script everything for that partner, basically, and drafted some kind of written onboarding questions that they then forward to us that are pretty self-selecting about somebody's level of experience and motivation. And the first conversation is with the founder, usually me, and it's more of a first impression conversation, right? It's usually a quick half hour about trying to test level of motivation. Philosophical and vision alignment for us are enormous because we're working on an incredibly difficult set of problems that have a long engineering tail, so that commitment needs to be apparent. And really self-awareness is as important to anything in that initial screen. And those are the two things that we kind of bring on first impression. And personally, I do those because maybe one of my skills on the founding team is I'm good at kind of first impression, finding what makes a person tick, usually. So I really thrive in having those conversations. And until it's not scalable anymore, I will still take them as top of the funnel. From there, we have a take-home test that we issue to someone we're interested in. Also measure commitment. It takes a good engineer still not a ton of time, but a few hours of time to do and study up the documentation in the back end. Enough of a bare minimum that shows some level of motivation. The take-home test has been a real asset for us. So one of my co-founders is Joey Krug. It's sort of an iteration of something they did at Augur that worked very well for them after figuring it out for a while. And now we leverage it in a different form. So it's a deceptively simple smart contract test with lots of logical holes that people tend to commit. But one thing, kind of one of our secrets that I'll sort of open source here is smart contract and security discipline is obviously paramount. And we don't really instruct candidates to write tests and prove that this works, but we really only are just moving forward with this or like production level testing without being told to do so, because it sort of indicates some level of discipline and curiosity and wanting to know, like, I want to show you that I figured this out. I want to know that it works myself. Also, the testing frameworks in Ethereum are terrible, so usually you have to kind of hack together your own solutions, right? So it's a self-selecting thing. And then kind of the next thing that we do is we bring somebody in and they have like a full afternoon of a co-working interview. So we do give them something relevant to our stack and they work on it with 1 or 2 members of our team. And I feel like it checks a couple of the boxes that you guys are getting out with co-working and also giving them something relevant. So that's the way our process unfolds. It ends again with a founder conversation to just kind of drive home that level of motivation. But we've really iterated on that a lot, and that process for us has been very teachable and effective. Ideally, you want it to be as self-selecting as possible as you proceed to the end, right? And I think that's evidence of a well-designed hiring process.
So obviously you put them through a lengthy interview process. They're taking home tests, they're doing projects. They've convinced you that they are an awesome candidate, you want them to join the company. How are you getting them to join the company? Because at this point you have to close them. So obviously there's compensation. Can you talk me through the tactics that you use to convince someone that this is a job for them?
Hopefully that's done by the final stage. That's what that first kind of founder conversation for us is all about, and that's what getting our recruiting partner excited about us has been all about, and kind of helping script the conversations for them. It's by the end of that first impression, the level of motivation should be apparent. And the last question to answer is kind of that co-working exercise. Just how do they work with our team? Hopefully, once you're that far along with somebody, getting to close is not a maintenance exercise. And so I think it's designing the process more than it is kind of having some secret at the final stage to the finish line. But some people might disagree with that.
I think I generally agree with that. And you keep reiterating the fact that you have this initial screening, which is incredibly valuable. I did mention this about our interview process with you as well, and I completely agree. This is enormously helpful. With regards to closing, I personally kind of think this starts from that conversation. And like one of my main goals in having a conversation with a candidate is to set expectations and learn about what's important to them in that initial call. So I really want to get a good sense for what it is that this person cares about technically and non-technically, and what they're optimizing for. And I think if you can highlight those things throughout your process, especially if you're trying to close them, be it putting them in touch with the appropriate person or surprising them in some thoughtful way that illustrates something about what they care about, that's helpful. I'm a very, very big believer in trying to establish mutual trust and transparency and expectations up front and maintain that throughout the process.
So that might be so more, we do the same thing as everybody here. And that first call, or that first meeting, really tells you whether you want to work together. It's like, right away you can kind of tell whether you're going to enjoy working together. And then it's filling the blanks too, when they're ready for the job, they care about the team, they're dedicated, etc., they have technical ability, etc.
Yeah, I think the thing is, like, they're interviewing us too. Things that I feel like candidates often want to know more about at close. And if it's Eng, a lot of the time the Eng workflows, you guys run on sprints, like how do you interact with other people on the team, like how are PMs and designers involved. People tend to care a lot about culture. Compensation is obviously a piece of this, but again, I think it's just trying to get people to be explicit about what they care about and having candid, open conversations about those things.
So you mentioned compensation. How does compensation competitiveness versus, say, other startups in the San Francisco area, other crypto companies, how do you evaluate comp? So base versus equity versus tokens potentially, especially something like 0x, 3 token. Can you talk me through how you think about that? And I know DYDX, you don't have a token right now, so there might be expectations of like, why don't we do a token? So if you guys have those experiences in conversation.
Yeah, I mean, for us, I guess we founded like a really traditional startup, just with equity. So our package is kind of like, we set expectations up front, just around like, it's going to be competitive alongside like other Series A type startups. I guess we don't really go into the whole token or the potential for a token thing early on. I think it's important to make sure that they're like excited to just the project. And if that's like happening down the line and we end up doing a token that's actually useful, then that's like a nice little sweetener on the end. So yeah, I kind of on the topic of the last point as well, I think it's like whoever's managing that recruiting process has to make sure that they're just like super aligned with that candidate all the way through. And comp is something that starts really early on as well. It shouldn't be like a huge surprise from a compensation point of view at the end. I think there's a huge gap and something's going on. Either like you didn't set the expectation or they just have a broader sense of what I guess it's not different from tokens, I'm not sure. But for us anyway, it's pretty normal structure. It's like Series A stage company. This is what you would typically kind of get from a range, cash and equity. And then it's just a spectrum from there that they can optimize.
Yeah, I think our general philosophy of compensation is try to return on the appropriate range of base might be for someone. This is sometimes from talking with other friends, this is from competitive offers that other candidates might have, this is from market data that exists elsewhere. Like
potentially coming from a VC firm, or there's some great compensation studies that exist, like Comtrix produces one. There's a thing called Option Impact, which is really cool, that shows a bunch of comp ranges for different kinds of companies. And I think we tell candidates up front, like, hey, our general philosophy on comp is we've done a lot of homework on this. We want to make you what we think is a really strong offer right off the bat. And if it's at all possible, we want you to acknowledge before we give you the offer that that is our philosophy. And we're rooted in reality, and if there's some data that you can show us that shows that we're off base, please do, and we can talk about it. But I do think like we try to be informed when we come into these conversations. Yeah, the token piece has a layer of nuance, especially for people that have not come from crypto or might not be as familiar with it. There are certainly a few differences. Some things that candidates might not expect or know. Tokens are immediately liquid when they vest. In many cases, projects that offer tokens might have created a finite amount of tokens, so the tokens are actually non-dilutive in many cases too. Like they may not raise an additional round of funding, or they might even be able to, which is something that I think candidates need to try and comprehend from time to time. It's also a very different market, obviously. Like the market is much more volatile with cryptocurrency than it is in like a traditional stock market. So we encourage candidates to do their research on these markets and come to their own conclusions on what that might mean. But those are the big things that I think are pretty different, I would say.
And building on top of it, if you're an engineer going to Google, obviously a large percentage of your comp is going to be in stock or RSUs. If you are planning on having a token, or you have a token already, and given the volatility of the market, is the expectation that it would be a much smaller percentage of your total comp, or is it kind of, this is what you're signing up for, so this is how it works?
I think the other thing about tokens is often, as different than equity, they have some utility in the context of the project that it's associated with. So it might grant you access to some kind of functionality within the application. But to address your question about like how proportionally, how the would package be, I again think this kind of comes back to expectations. I will often ask people if they have a preference between like salary versus tokens or whatever it is, and in some cases we might be willing to move that on a sliding scale. Like, so it's again, it's a back and forth conversation. It's dependent, I would say.
It's a lot of education to do too for people that you're hiring from outside of the crypto space.
We've talked about the recruiting process, interviewing, compensation, and you all are young companies, but one of the big factors is once you get talent in, you want to retain them. Super early days, but this challenges that arise in any startup. How are you thinking about ways to retain talent other than obviously giving them good work and inspire them by the culture, but other ways that are different within crypto or even similar to other startups that you're leveraging to keep talent in-house?
I think it's so different. Yeah. Inside, outside of crypto. Good culture, good bosses. Growth.
Interesting work, interesting projects.
Another area that's been talked a lot about in the crypto space is the idea of hiring distributed workforces. So whether that's people that work elsewhere, people that contract for you, are you employing any of those strategies to get someone to take on one specific project, to build one aspect of protocol? How are you leveraging those types of tools or resources?
When you say distributed, you don't mean geographically remote.
So could be geographically remote, but let's table that for now. More about the idea of like onboarding sort of more mercenary type workers as opposed to someone that's a full-time employee.
Yeah, we've done that quite a bit actually. I think when we're at a pretty early stage, there's certain things where there's not quite enough for like a full-time role. An example of that for us was design. So we actually got to our MVP expert using their contracts designer, or a couple of contract designers. We're now like looking for a full-time setup, but we're able to get that done. I think that was like a really good outcome for us. I think there's a place for that in crypto, because I think often development cycles look kind of weird as well. Like we spend a long time in our protocol, and there's like very rush periods when we work on an actual application. So like we're able to plan for that and just like bring someone in, onboard them, and actually just get them really productive. Yeah, so we're definitely open to it. We also like to use agencies for recruiting. We actually just hired an in-house recruiter from an agency, which she shouldn't be really, she's starting to quit. Yeah, so I think, yeah, we're definitely kind of exposed to that. I think longer term we want to build a local team in SF. But at an early stage, we're definitely open to using resources where it makes sense.
For us, I think there have been very few cases where we have done it, like hire a contractor to handle a very specific task. We think they have a very niche skill set that meets that task, and maybe even more so if we have some positive reference on them, like if you're a friend and you trust them. But I don't think it's super common for us, to be honest. And I think this model is actually really interesting of projects like sharing talent. Like I know like Ethereum and Dfinity do some mind sharing, for example. And I'd be super curious to hear more about like what that means in terms of connectivity and that kind of thing. But I don't doubt that it could work, and I would imagine that like the knowledge sharing that happens from doing that is actually beneficial. But I think to be candid, we have a lot that we want to ship, and if we're able to hire folks full time who can commit their entire mind share to what we're doing, I think that's been beneficial for us. Like we do want people to ideally be like pretty deeply embedded philosophically and technically in our work. So that's generally how we think about it. I can say that. Another thing is, I mentioned before, we care a lot about hiring for values, and it's not to say that someone couldn't adhere to our value set as well as other companies, but I think that that's a little bit of a consideration for us too.
What I'll do is I'll just turn it over to all of you, see if you have any questions. It's fine. Panelists.
Yeah, blockchain is obviously so global. I feel like you're often trying to pick up brand ambassadors or different local people on the ground in Asia or Europe or wherever. Do you guys have any tips for picking up people abroad, and how does the screening process take when you can't be in the room?
Do you mean hiring people remotely?
Yeah, hiring brand ambassadors, people abroad that can help kind of evangelize your products, or even meeting people on the ground in different locations. Does the process change there? What kind of tips do you have for getting talent?
Sorry, but you mean people who would be potentially working on your core team, not like volunteering as kind of ambassadors to your project?
Either. But my main thing would be core team.
Yeah, I mean, for us, we do have a partially distributed team, so the majority of us are here in San Francisco, but I think at the moment we're 12 or 13 engineers, I have to count again, and I want to say 6 of them are remote, and kind of all around the world. 2 in the US, 1 in Canada, 1 in Switzerland, 1 in Poland, 1 in Australia, 1 in the Netherlands, who's probably going to be in San Francisco. So I do think there are some unique considerations around interviewing, but more importantly, I think it's about building the right communications infrastructure to effectively support remote workers once they're there. Because navigating multiple time zones and even building a general culture where you're not mindful of the differences and constraints of having remote workers can be dangerous, in my opinion. So I could talk more about what I think a good remote infrastructure looks like, but in terms of like hiring them, again, I mentioned before we believe pretty deeply in trying to do interviews that are emulative of the real world. So when we hire remote folks, we tend to actually interview them remotely as well, just because it's much more similar to the experience. We also care a lot about trying to get everyone in the office a couple times a year if we can. So when people start, we ask if they spend a couple weeks in San Francisco onboarding, if it's at all possible, and then we'll get the whole team together like quarterly and just fly everyone out if we can. But other than that, I don't think the process deviates too much. It's pretty similar. Where you look might be different. You might, depending on where you're trying to hire, you might want to try to map out companies or places that would be fruitful to
said something that's important. Getting them here and embedding them in your culture is key to the success. Because if they're off remote, it's hard. Remote work is hard. I had a company before that had an office in New York, London, and Hong Kong. These were big offices, 40, 50 people each, and even the culture differences between offices was minimal.
I would say as far as finding people in those geographies, when we can fundraise in private, we really try to prioritize having a highly technical kind of aligned investor in a lot of different hubs, essentially in each continent. And that's really paid dividends for us for advisory resources and for talent inflow as well. So, we spend time cultivating investor relationships with really, really technical people, obviously in Asia and in Africa and South America as well. And it's really, I think it's really helped a lot. For a lot of advisory arrangements, for running a coordinated sort of external audit process, which we've been doing for some time in private, that's been really valuable. So, I agree with all the process points. It's even really important to start building that process in your organization before you even have anybody remotely, I think, because your people that are here every day also have to adhere to the same norms. But maybe if there was some aspect of your question was more about sourcing in the first place, then something that was something we strategically did that's made a lot of dividends early on.
Thinking a little bit more about that, I think the other thing that we do differently when we're giving people are remote is try to make sure that they're aware of the constraints of working remotely, like what the challenges are, and make sure that they have some thoughts on how to mitigate those things. Common challenges, in my opinion, are it sometimes requires a little bit of a higher degree of time management and autonomy than it might working in the office. If you can't just get up and tap somebody on the shoulder all the time. Some people might get a little bit of like cabin fever, so to speak, if they're in their house by themselves all day and they don't have some other social arrangement happening. So we pretty explicitly ask people like, hey, if you want to work remotely, like what do you think that entails, and what strategies you might be able to employ to make that work. And vice versa, considering you're interviewing us, I think if we can show them that we've been thoughtful about building a culture that is conducive to remote work, it goes a really long way. And some of the things that we've done personally are we place a very big emphasis, for example, on doing things in writing where we can, and ideally asynchronously, so people can kind of log on anywhere around the world and pick up context. To the extent that if you come into our office and there are two people that are kind of sitting next to each other working on the same thing, often they'll be talking about it in like a public Slack channel, just so that folks who are remote can kind of stay on the same page. So again, I would say it's making sure you know that they are aware of the constraints, but also demonstrating to them like that you have a culture that's thoughtful around supporting remote workers.
So you discussed, I guess, with regards to compensation, that you typically make offers in the ballpark of what other Series A in what other Series A companies make offers in. Like, at least from the research that I've seen, that varies not only because there's Series A, but there's tech Series A, and there's crypto Series A, and those figures are all relatively different, both in terms of like actual cash comp and equity comp. I don't know if you'd be inclined to give any ballpark figures, but
Yeah, it's like on our AngelList profile. But we did a lot of research with our investors. So like Andrews and Horowitz is just like a ton of hard data that they shared with us. So that was like super helpful. Same with like bank cap. So yeah, that was like a really good data source for us. And also just anecdotally, like all of our team has like comes from like varying these levels of experience and works with like different kinds of startups. So I think just through that you also get a decent sense of what it should be. So yeah, nothing kind of like too crazy. No magic bullet there, just get as much data as we can.
Yeah, I actually think AngelList is an interesting source for this. You can look at a bunch of companies in different stages, and often they have ranges listed. Again, I would also say like I'm not as familiar with the differences between crypto Series A versus regular Series A, particularly because we never raised the Series A where I work. But you might want to look at some of the compensation survey data that exists too, like option packs is an interesting one that you can probably get your hands on.
and that
obviously contact me for project or your company. Just a quick question about follow-up. Do any of you offer company salary equity equities? And then for example, UADX, and I assume 0x, I'm assuming what it offers on the token comp, and then it's equity comp. When you have candidates who you really like, and you're paying equity as well, like, do you ever get the question, what is the value of equity, specifically if you're decentralized?
Yeah, I mean, this goes back to kind of like whether or not there's a plan to like create a business model around this. One of the big reasons why we actually built Expo on top of the protocol, because it kind of creates a lot of easy ways for us to actually capture value. But we're pretty upfront that, again, like this is a really long-term thing. Both from just like this tech could take a while, or like, adoption could take a while. Like, there's just a lot of things that I guess present themselves as risks, and the candidate has to be sort of comfortable with that. I don't know so much, like, we can give them like a ballpark number, but it isn't like based on valuation, right? But it's not necessarily like really indicative, I feel. There's just so many risks that go into it. They more just have to buy in, I think, to like what we're doing, right? Like, it's really difficult to actually just put like a physical number on it. But yeah, there are ways to do it, right? Like, based on valuation and break down that way.
Full disclosure, our company, we offer all three as well. But like, people are asking, like, what is your liquidity of that? Like,
yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, look, there's a number of different ways for us, right? It's like any other startup, so I don't think it's any different.
Even if you, but I would add, even if you don't have a business model at all, acquisition premiums for talent in the space are really high right now. Like, the multiple on a really strong blockchain team is pretty frenzied for the last couple of years. So there are various ways to compensate employees in that type of liquidity event, but equity is the most straightforward. So even without a business model, that's one reason why I think it's important to your employees to have some stake. They understand in that regard.
Any more questions? Sure.
Yeah, I have a bunch of earlier stage, you may not necessarily have product managers in your sort of near-term sites. Yeah, I guess could either one of you like speak to what the need is for a product manager and what stage of the product?
Yeah, so I can say I joined 0x at the end of March, and we were, I think I was a 10th employee when I joined. A PM was one of the most I joined just prior. So it was one of the very early hires that we made, and I think that was an intentional decision, and it was enormously beneficial to us. Tom, who is our PM, is a godsend. We're at the point now where that we may be looking for more in the very near term. So I wouldn't say that every project that's early is necessarily against the idea.
Yeah, I mean, we're at 6 people, and I think PM is probably one of the next 3 hires that we make. We're actually putting out a job description on next week about it. For us, it's a little different. It's more, so we're building, I guess, something more akin to a trading platform. It's probably going to be a little more specific around someone who has like really clear finance options trading experience. But I think it's really important. Like, there's no shortage of different things we work on. It just helps the team enormously and being able to focus on what is the right thing to work on.
Yeah, that's a key point. It's not a near-term priority for us because we're sort of deeper back-end open source development right now, but I will say that, I mean, there's a ton of capital in the space floating around with zero user data. So I think that's a really relevant issue, and it's a slippery slope for a company to become incredibly distracted without the benefit of user data, but with seemingly limitless capital for a little while. So I think that kind of a maturing phase in the space with spread in the product, and if you're on a very
somewhere I would encourage you to know where you're landing. Because there are a lot of DApp projects that are going to go into beta, I think, next year, hopefully. Some of them are, found it more difficult than we anticipated to build, but I think it's a pretty opportune time.
All right. Oh, wait. Yeah.
I have a quick question. So as you're going through the interview process, for the people that don't work out, like what are the shortcomings or things that go wrong? Do they choke on coding skills or domain knowledge or like what happens to be for engineers specifically? But just for like
I don't think it's ever really domain knowledge. I think obviously through the process they have to demonstrate like more and more interest in the industry, or you could say, right? Otherwise it's kind of not a good fit. I think for engineering, it would be certainly just technical prowess, just wouldn't be up to scratch would be the main reason. Yeah, but I think we often start interviewing with candidates who don't really know much about crypto. That's totally fine. And we usually one of the things we do actually is for those kind of candidates we have a simple information pack, not only about DYDX but just how we fit within the ecosystem. Because one of the hardest things for candidates who are new to the space is just navigating what the hell's going on and just doing what, and what has legs and what's interesting and why. So for us it's this DYDX is what we do. Where in the decentralized exchange space, we're built on Ethereum. These are our investors, and these are their thoughts on why Ethereum is exciting. So it's a one-pager, just with some links, some articles, so they can just easily digest some of that information. And then you hope that as they meet more people and go through the process, they get more and more excited. And even if it's not super in-depth at that point, they clearly learn a lot by the time they go through the workshop.
yeah, I think I might have mentioned before some of the stuff that we tend to optimize for in terms of what we're trying to hire for. So yes, some baseline skills in your job, like the core competencies are of course important. But beyond that, communication skills are equally important. Learning agility is something we try to assess, and that's important. Alignment with our values, again, I keep coming back to this, but it's really critical to us, and there have been cases where we've met people who are very technically strong but decided not to make them an offer because for whatever reason we didn't know that we had no signal on whether they were aligned with our culture and our values, specifically our values. Another thing is our own team composition, to be honest. So sometimes headcount can be limited or potentially even mentorship bandwidth. If we get the sense that somebody is great, but they're very high potential, but they might need a little bit more hand-holding than we're able to provide, that might be a case where we might have to unfortunately say not right now. But one thing that I also think is very important, maybe harkening back to interview processes, I'm a big believer in giving people feedback, whether or not we're moving them forward. So hopefully, this is something that you might have a sense of as your candidate going through this.
Hi, I'm a developer from South Korea. Do you have any remote worker from Korea? Curious.
Not yet. No. But I don't know. We would be open to considering someone, I would say.
I have two questions. First one is, have you guys tried any campus recruiting or recruiting any? Do you guys only recruiting experienced ones or also just campus?
Yeah, we were actually at Stanford recruiting event not too long ago. So we're probably not looking. We just hired someone actually just out of college. So we're probably not looking for anyone that junior for a little while, just for this bandwidth reason. But there's a lot of, there's a bunch of candidates who are going back to do a master's or something, to have a couple of years experience that could be interesting for us. So we're definitely open to it. There's no hard and fast rule there, but yeah, certainly open to it. And we definitely want to get out to those events and meet people. It's a longer term kind of play as well, right? May not be this year, but maybe 2-3 years down the line, they're still excited by DYDX and want to learn more.
I think, like Mike just mentioned, we previously went to a Stanford blockchain career fair. We also received at the blockchain at Berkeley. We on. We also have done a couple like launching and Berkeley events, but we haven't done like full-blown university recruiting like yet. We've also been trying to get calibrated right now on like what kinds of engineers can we accommodate and how junior, how much experience they have. I will say that like early days, we were very intentional about trying to hire folks who we thought could operate with a pretty high degree of autonomy. But now that we're growing and we have a little bit more management bandwidth, this could change and it might be something that we'll look into in the near term. I do think university recruiting can be very fruitful, assuming you have the right infrastructure set up for it. But we're like just getting to the point now where that's even kind of possible consideration for us, I would say.
Also, have you guys handled any like issues with visas, like working visas, green card, this kind of issues?
I want a visa. So yeah, I mean we're open to it, particularly if they already have like H1B who do the transfer, and like other easier visas like E3 or TM. But outside that, I think it's a little hard for us to do like the green card and stuff like that. We're just a little too small.
Yeah, we do it for what it's worth. If we can make it happen, we'll try. There are sometimes complexities. Like if you need sponsorship for a visa and you're not going to be able to enter the US until you get sponsorship, then you would have to work remotely. We would want to feel comfortable with you potentially working remotely, but I think like if there's a path forward and we mutually kind of love each other, like we're willing to put the effort to try to make it happen.
Yeah, also, right now the H1B transfer process is a lot slower.
Yeah.
And it sucks. So people are getting RFPs that never received RFPs before,
Yes.
right? And that's just kind of now the expectation. So, you know, if you're a candidate, that may be an issue, or that's something to anticipate, or something to anticipate as a company. But, you know, it's just really important to commit to that process ahead of time and manage the expectation for what the onboarding roadmap looks like, in anticipation of that, and hopefully weather the storm for now, and maybe we'll improve over time.
Yeah, there have been a lot of changes with the current administration that affected visa stuff, but there are companies out there.
How would you describe your company culture and what steps do you take to cultivate it?
We could take a whole another building block if anyone want to take a hot take on it, we're running low on time.
How much time do we have for second girls?
We have 2 minutes.
In that case, I would say we have a blog post on our mission and values. I keep coming back to it. There are 3 of them. I think it pretty broadly encapsulates a lot about our culture. There's some nuance there that's missing, but for the sake of keeping this to 2 minutes, check it out. If you want to talk offline, I'm happy to give you a better sense.
So I'll give you guys a quick plug opportunity. So there's a lot of different projects in the room, people that are looking for jobs. So if there's anything that's super important to you right now and you want to call out, or if you want to go to buy leveraged ETH or short ETH, you can do that as well. But we can close out with that as an appreciation for your time tonight.
On the spot. So going back to our culture, like I would like to just add part of that. Really process oriented. Everybody's incredibly intellectually curious, and everybody on our team has enormous risk tolerance, which longevity of commitment comes with that. So I think on our particular implementation, if interested, I think that we're working on some of the most pressing questions in zero knowledge cryptography and scaling some libraries that are only now emerging from academia into attempted production. So I think some of the most interesting kind of problems in the space lie in the application of those frameworks to kind of scalability problems and others. So that's what we're working on. And we would love to talk to you if you have an interest in applied cryptography, back-end scalability. We're also looking for a front-end engineer. There's a ton of those candidates out there. We've been incredibly selective, and if you're a killer or you know a killer, then we would certainly like to meet them. But thanks for coming.
Yeah, we're looking for front-end full-stack engineers, designer, and I guess guess I just share the product manager as well. Yeah, I guess we're really excited to work on something that has a really clear use case today. It's like pretty cool to see as crypto is just going wild, people are jumping into short leveraged tokens, and in the future like other financial derivatives is in our roadmap. So if you're excited to kind of get involved in that and similar to you guys doing things with how we do, it's really exciting, quite powerful, and people will slowly then catch on. Yeah, come join us, come chat. Feel free to just drop in line anytime.
Yeah, I agree. Glad to see this turn out. I think we're equally excited about the longer term societal implications of what this actually means. So if that's equally inspiring to you, I'm generally open to talking to anyone who is smart and passionate. We're definitely hiring engineers of all sorts. We may be looking for a visual designer soon, potentially a PM, potentially someone who will interface with market makers. I'm hiring someone on my team who will be handling sourcing, kind of top of the funnel recruiting stuff. But again, like, our needs change really quickly, and I'd love to connect with you guys for that reason or any other reason. So,
Saying our needs change daily, it seems. We also have an accelerator in enterprise advisory, so we just have included dozens of projects that are all looking for all of the same kinds of candidates. It's really about the smarts, risk tolerance, and things like that. Specific knowledge.
thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.